And I just want to encourage you, God's faithfulness to you does not depend on your faith. His goodness in your life is not a function of your goodness. So celebration is not about proof. There's just so much joy available to us when we take God at his word and when we celebrate him.
Nicole, thank you so much for coming back and hanging out with us. I feel like you are maybe the only in-person, except for Justin, podcast guest we've had, and now it's twice.
Oh my goodness, I'm so honored, really.
I know.
It's so fun.
And I feel there are definitely feelings, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I feel like we're on an SNL skit sitting side by side together. Yeah. Like, I feel like we could start talking about, like, Christmas cookies or something.
Yes.
But we won't, because it's not Christmas. In fact, it's spring almost.
Yes.
Which I'm super excited about. So we are here to talk about celebrating. And when you got here, we did a little celebration. We got some cupcakes over here.
So kind.
With some glitter star things on the top. That we're really excited about, because as we are recording this, you are just 4 days away, I guess, from this book being out in the world. So how does that feel?
All the feels. You're an author, you know how it feels, but I'm excited. It's a message that, I said the other day, it's a message that has changed my life, but I think a better way of saying it is it's a message that's continuing to change my life, because the practices in there have become part of my rhythms and really important everyday practices.
You talk in the book that you are not a person who's naturally wired to celebration, or at least you through life happening, that has become the case. And the book opens with this scene of you and your family making a tradition in the summer of making s'mores and a fire pit in the front yard, and whoever wants to come by can come by. The drinks are out, the invitation is open, and somebody asked you, like, what is this for? And you said, basically because celebration is changing my life. It's changing how I'm living. It's changing how I see the world. And you have a couple quotes here I want to start with. You said you had likened celebration to dessert. It was enjoyable, yes, but indulgent and unnecessary. And you talk about, like, I know that God is good, but I imagine that the, quote, good in my life would always look like broccoli on a dinner plate, good for me, but never something I felt excited about. One of the most painful fears I carried was that I would always be disappointed by the story God had written for me, which is just so beautiful. And I so resonate with that. And I think it's so interesting that the earliest version of celebration we see in this book is you having a dessert in the form of s'mores. So talk a little bit about that tension you've had with celebration and, like, why that's felt scary.
Yeah, it's funny you mention life impacting my natural tendency, because I think snapshots of my childhood, especially early childhood, before pressure and performance really haunted me, I think those snapshots are exuberant and free. And I think I came into the world a natural celebrator. I love celebrating other people. But this book was actually born out of a season that could largely be characterized by change and loss, and probably part of our conversation last time I sat in this seat.
Yeah.
And, when you experience a season like that, there's the loss itself, whether it's the loss of a family member or a painful event or tragedy or a betrayal even, or a season of longing and waiting, whatever it is. And then there's the cost. And the cost is the impact to either our sense of identity or our sense of safety. And what took me a long time to realize was that part of the cost for me was that my joy was always accompanied by fear. I felt like celebration always came with a catch. It felt easier not to hope. I would practice disappointment and basically pray, but prepare to mourn. And so I was really sad when I recognized that cost and woke up one morning and just thought, gosh, I don't want to miss my beautiful God-given life because I am so busy preparing for the worst.
Yeah, I love that. Let's unpack that just a tiny bit because, like, my brain was like, ooh, interesting. Like, what is one layer even below that? So, like, if you had to put a, like, algorithm to it, an algebraic equation for you, I've never asked anybody to put their life into an algebraic equation.
I'll do my best.
But where I'm going with this is, like, for you, if I celebrate, was the if-then part of that statement, the then part, then the world will notice and take it away from me. God will notice and take it away from me. Like, I don't want to, like, wave the pom-pom because it'll make a target out of me. Like, was that kind of part of it? Like, if I celebrate this, it might, I'm just asking for.
Yeah. No, I think that was certainly a piece of it, not all of it, but I would overlay my own pain onto my relationship with God.
Yeah.
And I would have never actually said that I believed this, but I almost interacted with my life as if there was some sort of ledger, like, okay, she's had some good after some pain, so now we're going to swing back to the pain to kind of balance it out because she's had her fair share.
Yeah.
And I think in my conversations, I'm a therapist, so in my conversations with clients and even friends and family around this topic, I think a lot of us are carrying assumptions like that. Like, if it's good, then you better watch out.
100%.
That foreboding joy that Brene Brown talks about.
Yeah, we're going to get into that for sure. I have this question for you that's kind of, after asking you to put it into an algebraic formula, it's going to be a softball after that. But the question, I was actually in my laundry room a couple weeks ago thinking of this particular question for you. And it's something along the lines of, do you believe, I'm just going to ask the question, then I'll explain it. Do you believe celebration is a primary or a secondary color? And what I mean by that is, do you think celebration is a mix of the other colors in the disciplines like joy and hope, or gratitude and contentment, or faith and hope? Or do you think it's like its own primary color, its own entity itself?
What a beautiful question.
Ooh, thank you.
I think the practices, let me think that through and then I'll pick one. I think the practices include a lot of the attributes that you mentioned. For instance, I think Thanksgiving, which maybe we'll talk about later, is a really helpful practice in celebration. But I think we've made a mistake of assuming that those things are ticking the boxes of celebration. And while those are included in celebration, I do think it stands on its own. And it might look different in different seasons, which I think is why it's so elusive sometimes, is we've so narrowed our description of celebration to basically a party. That's how a lot of us think of it. Yeah. That we don't understand that it can look different in different seasons.
Yeah, I almost got like a picture of confetti when you were describing it. It's like there are these pieces that can make up the whole, but if you just try to make it about any one of them, you lose that magic of what the confetti is, the full spectrum of what it can be. What do you feel like is the difference? I know this is an important point you want to make for people to understand, especially because you talk so beautifully about our tendencies to numb out and our tendencies to like not sit with the things we're feeling. So for you, what is the difference between that celebration and that escape? And how do we know which one we're residing in, we're spending time in?
Yeah, it's tough to distinguish because a lot of people want to look at the behavior and just say, okay, watching TV is escape and celebration is a really great conversation over dessert, or they want to define it. But the behavior itself, with the exception of obvious destructive behaviors, the behavior itself is not going to really tell us whether you're engaging in escape or celebration. A good question to ask is what am I looking for?
Yeah.
So escape is going to hit the pause button on our emotional processing. It's going to pull us away and be disconnecting.
Okay.
Celebration is always going to pull us toward connection, either with God or ourselves or other people. And it's a way of engaging with our life and working through our life instead of checking out of our life.
Yeah. You have two questions in this book that I feel like become the backbone of the book. And you mentioned one of them already, and that is what does this cost you? What does it cost you? And that's got like, that itself has two sides to it, right? It's like, what does this cost you in terms of like, no, truly, something has happened to you and there has been a cost associated. And then there's like, what we do with that when we hold on to those things and continue to hold on to them and like clenching our fists around them, like, I have walked through unforgiveness and holding on tight to that. And it's like, what is holding on to that costing you in, every single day that continues on in your new life and the life you have now? What is it costing you? And then the other question is there's this beautiful scene with you and your friend Blair. You're in her kitchen. The sign on her wall said, what if it's actually going to be okay? What if it's actually going to be okay? And she asks you, you're like, okay, maybe it will be okay. And she says to you, what the title of the book, what if it's wonderful? And so when you think about those two, you have a quote, you mentioned it when you were giving your answer. I want to read it word for word. You said, I had become highly suspicious of joy. I became practiced in praying for the miracle, at the same time preparing to mourn. And so when you think about those two guideposts, one of them is based in like a cost-benefit analysis, right? It's like you're driven by loss. What are you going to lose if you continue to do this? The other one is driven by hope and faith. And so on a day-to-day basis, do you go back and forth between those questions, or which one are you living in these days?
I am through the discipline of celebration. I will be very honest, I take my title to the face multiple times a day. And it's become one of the reasons it's the title of the book is it's such a helpful question in interrupting that pessimistic thinking that the research is clear actually doesn't protect us from any despair or disappointment. So even if you rehearse disaster, even if you practice disappointment, and you're all prepared for the outcome that you fear, if that outcome does happen, you're no more prepared for it or no less hurt by it when you do encounter what you fear. But you will have protected yourself from a ton of delight and joy and connection with the people you love. Yeah. Because your eyes are so cast down, hyper vigilant for what could happen.
Yeah. You talk in the book, and this part really jumped out to me. You are recognizing, there's a moment you're recognizing the last decade of your life. You're grieving the last decade of your life because it has been lost. What has been lost has been a decade of saying, let me try to protect, let me try to predict it coming. Let me try to guard myself at every turn, only to end up guarded off from joy and delight and celebration and being fully immersed and present in your life. And that really speaks to me because I have felt that same kind of grief about decades of my life that have been lost to striving and chasing people and waiting to matter in their eyes or waiting to have enough of something to have enough, people not see right through me kind of thing. And I feel like we're just perpetually, when I think about the first 10 years of our photography business and how many days were lost to, we got to keep up with those people. We're comparing with those people. Why is it happening for those people and not us? And you just do not get that time back. And so that my question / comment is, I feel like it's so crucial that we do actually actively grieve that time so that we can use that clarity of grief to not do it for the next 10 years.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so easy to keep doing it. You get into a new industry, you get into a new world or whatever it is. There's always an opportunity to close yourself off from What if it's wonderful? What if it actually does all work out? What if it's better than you imagined? I so resonate with that. I want to read a quote here. You say, I don't want to look back on my life, my beautiful, wonder-filled, God-given life, and realize that I've mostly missed it while I was busy preparing for the worst. And, you know, you talk in the book about the difference of finding the courage to celebrate not being a journey, but a quest. So what is the difference between journey versus quest? What does that teach us about not perpetually making the same mistake?
Yes. So when I went to scripture and I went to current psychological research to really understand joy and celebration and what was God's design and how does the brain work, it was clear to me that few among us, if any of us, drift toward joy. So left on neutral, we're a little bit like a car whose alignment's off. We pull negative.
Yeah.
And just a few dynamics going on in the brain so we can understand our starting place is one is a phenomenon called the hedonic treadmill, which means that the brain rapidly adapts to joy.
Yes.
So you and I have both experienced a big win or a yes, or even a joy or a gift or an opportunity that we thought would make us want for nothing else. Like it's happened. Like this is amazing. And then your brain rapidly adapts to it, like getting used to cold water.
Yeah.
You know, there's that initial shock and then your body acclimates. And so your brain is very much like that with joy. The second thing is negative input is so much stickier than positive input.
Velcro versus Teflon.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the brain is so efficient. It just only notices and catches and holds things that it thinks it needs to, which unfortunately tends to be traumatic events or really negative things that we might worry about or so those everyday moments of delight, the good things that God is doing in your life or the good things that he's given you or the ways that he's at work in your heart or in your circumstances are not things that the brain naturally thinks it needs.
Because they're like looking for woolly mammoths to eat it or whatever.
Yes, exactly. And then the third thing is just our tendency to tell our joy how it can be improved upon. So I resonate with your tendencies towards striving in comparison, and everything you just shared a few minutes ago resonates deeply with my story as well. And so I know you understand that feeling of yes, and there's that moment of joy and it's so exciting. And then it's like, oh, but the compliment could have been nicer.
Yeah.
Or this could have happened. And you start telling that moment of joy.
Wow.
How it could be better.
Yeah.
And so that is our starting place. That's what we're up against.
Okay, now I have to stop you and go, why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Is that a God design so that we stay in communion with him, so he points us to joy? Is that a fallen world? We're out of Eden, Adam and Eve problem? Like from a, you know, I don't think that's an answer we can look up somewhere. In scripture or otherwise, maybe I'm wrong. But like, when you think about that we are naturally wired that way and have from caveman days been that we have been that pull to the left or whatever, out of alignment. Is that a God thing or is that a fallen world thing?
I think in some ways both. I think our brokenness, the gift of that and the gift of our humanity is understanding our need for Christ and a hope beyond this world, that we were not made for this world. This is not our home. Yeah. If I look at my disappointments in life, yes, there's been valid loss as there's been in your story, and definitely pain points. Right. We're not trying to call those anything other than hurtful and painful. Yeah. But when I look at a lot of the disappointment, a lot of that has been expecting more joy from the gift than it was meant to give.
Yes.
And there is a moment in Scripture where, Jesus's disciples and some of his other followers, through the power of the Holy Spirit, they perform this miracle and they get to see God at work in front of their lives, and they come back and they're so excited to tell Jesus about it. And Jesus actually admonishes them. He warns them like, oh, don't celebrate too much. And he's not saying, don't delight in my good gifts, or don't thank me for the wonderful ways I'm moving and working in your heart and mind and life. He's saying, this isn't it.
Yeah.
This isn't the fullness of what's available to you through me and what's coming through being totally unified and reunited with me.
Yeah.
And so I think, to answer your question, there's an opportunity, and I think you're right. I don't think we can open our Bibles and understand the answer to that question, but there is an opportunity in that negativity to think, okay, not only what could God do, but how am I being asked to reorder what I love?
Yeah.
And put my joy in the right thing.
Yeah, I love that so much. And when you were talking, that made me think of things like neuroplasticity. And like not only is everything we talked about how we're naturally drawn to negativity to keep us alive and safe, but we were also created with an ability to rewire.
Yes.
Which is very fascinating.
Yes.
And then I love when moments of like science and scripture collide, and you have what has always just been mistaken as like, Pollyanna, like whatever is noble and pure and beautiful, think on these things. And it's like, or maybe it was part of the handbook of humaning where it's like, you can actually rewire this.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And speak to it. And I think a lot of the practices outlined in the book of how those rhythms of celebration versus just considering it as a reward is part of that rewiring.
Yeah.
And helps us imagine what God could do. I think sometimes imagination can be where we go to escape reality, but I think it can also be where we go to encounter reality and remind us of what is possible with God, even if we don't know exactly what that looks like.
Yes. Yeah. I'm curious, since you mentioned it, what is like, you're getting ready to launch a book, you're 4 days out. What is your like lifeline of rhythm of celebration right now?
No, I was thinking about this morning because I've launched a book before, and I'm just going to be honest with you and everyone listening and or watching that it needs to go differently this time. I was so overwhelmed by emotion and all of and I'll be kind to myself. I had never done it before, and I was in a different season then, and have compassion on where she was when she launched her first book. But I also, now I'm aware of practices that are going to be really helpful to me and just embracing that day.
Yeah.
2 practices that are I practice most often, and I think are going to be really key in the weeks ahead.
Yeah.
One is savoring, and savoring celebrates the ordinary. So this is our counter to all the things that I just shared about the brain.
Yeah.
So this helps us capture and keep what our brain would be tempted to dismiss or call not good enough. And the way that you do it is you just take a snapshot. So you bought me beautiful cupcakes that are the prettiest, almost too pretty to eat.
Almost.
We'll dig into those when this is over.
Yeah.
But just looking at those on the counter and seeing your face next to them and a reminder of our friendship and the many ways that you've celebrated me, that would be enough of a snapshot to then ask my 5 traditional senses what they're going to remember about this moment. So what do I see? What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I taste? And what do I feel?
Yeah.
And there's a couple benefits to that. One is that I get to keep that special memory and highlight it
Yeah.
and am more likely to recall it moving forward.
I have all the images of Inside Out in my head right
Yes,
now.
yes. That's a very helpful movie.
Yes.
But also, if you tend to be anxious, I'll raise my hand
Me
here. Anxiety pulls our brain into the future where we try and prepare for the worst and practice disappointment, or it pulls our brain into the past where we relive conversations or we replay things that we feel like could have gone differently. This keeps us really present.
Yeah.
And just enjoying the moment. The second practice is Thanksgiving. So we talk a ton about gratitude. It feels like you can't walk into a store without seeing a gratitude journal or a jar. And I think it's a really great conversation. The research says it does increase our joy.
Yeah.
It just hands down, that's what it does. But what we don't often talk about is that Thanksgiving, actually expressing the gratitude that we feel, doubles the joy that we glean from gratitude. So taking the time this week to say thank you, Mary, for having me on the show and for being such a kind and supportive friend through the years. And you are such a safe person for me to talk through author stuff. And I love talking with you. And I'm really, really grateful for your friendship. It makes a big difference in this season for me.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean all that. That's not just an example, but being able to actually express the joy that we feel. Had I just kept that to myself, I would have felt a certain degree of joy, but actually getting to tell you throws gasoline on that. And so I plan to spend a lot of time either writing notes or if I get the opportunity to look somebody in the eye and say thank you.
Which brings me to, which is so beautiful and brings me right to this reminder of how much we need people. Yeah. Like this thing that actually doubles our joy does not happen without other people, without getting to express, to say to them, which is, we could go down all sorts of rabbit holes about what the last 2 years have done to us. Yes. In terms of, all of the things, but also joy and celebration. So that's really, really powerful. I want to talk about the many phases of self-preservation when life feels unsafe. And that also really spoke to me as, I don't know if we've even gotten to talk about this. The last time we were here, I might have been telling you I was an Enneagram 3, which I super thought I was. I have since discovered that I am a self-preserving 4.
Oh,
and
interesting.
Self-preserving 4s try to achieve their way into safety. They look like 3s for that reason. And just this concept of the switch that gets flipped for a lot of us in a lot of different ways, whether it's how we grew up or a loss that happens or a move or betrayal, like you said. There can be a lot of different things that we start to lean into. One of my coaching clients is a therapist, and she talks about these protector personalities in our brains. Like the inner critic is actually one of these protectors. It's just trying to keep you safe from looking dumb, or what have you. And you go through some of these phases, specifically pessimism, cynicism, and that foreboding joy that I want to kind of go through. I'm going to read a couple quotes, and then I just want you to kind of tag in and talk about how they're masquerading. They're not actually doing what we think what we think they're doing. So you say, for me, when life begins to feel perilous, I mostly rely on control to keep the plates spinning. Amen. I imagine the worst possible outcome for an event and decide that this tragic scenario is actually my reality. In my profession, we call that catastrophizing. Did I say that right? Okay, good.
Very good.
Catastrophizing. I do this in hopes that no pain will surprise me. And then later you add, I was terrified that hope would make a fool of me. You say, while pessimism is one of my most trusted protectors, it is not trustworthy. So talk about that. What, it's so tricky. Why does it look trustworthy? Why does it feel trusted? But it's not actually.
Yeah, so all of those behaviors that you just mentioned, pessimism, cynicism, foreboding joy, all of that would fall in that control category. And as a therapist, I practice a model called restoration therapy. And the 4 buckets that people use, the phases of self-preservation, would be blame, shame, control, and escape. So all of those would be in that control category. And they're trusted because maybe they were needed when we were little.
Yeah.
And, you've lived a story, I've lived a story, and your empowerment growing up in the world is much smaller than it is as an adult. And those are survival techniques.
Yeah.
And to have compassion on our younger selves and say, at a certain point, they were probably needed. And what was needed then is now like what served as a protection then is now a barrier to connection now. And so they're trusted because our brains are wired to rely on them.
Yeah.
So when that pain button gets hit, whether it's inadequacy or powerlessness or feeling alone, there is a neural pathway to trust that protector.
Yeah.
And yet it's not serving us anymore. And it doesn't lead to health and wholeness. It's a short-term solution that tends to create or prolong that longer-term problem.
That's so good. Protection versus connection. I love that. And you talked about, you said earlier, like that foreboding joy is a concept from Brene Brown. And I actually already had in my notes to talk about Brene Brown here. The question that I have is, like, in your own experience, when you have self-protected that way, and when you have sort of like shoved down the emotions, I think of like Brene Brown talking about when we are not being authentic, the side effects look like anxiety, pain in our body, like all these other different manifestations of like shoving it down, crying 3 days at a retreat in Arizona. Just for example, just to throw that out there. So for you in your life, when you have leaned into your protectors because they felt trusted, but you now know you were actually just like shoving it down, how was that manifested for you, like even physically or in other unexpected ways?
So I get migraine headaches, and there's many roads that lead to those, some of which I can manage, some of which I can't. But when my stress level, because I am performing my way into a place of security or into feeling significant and loved, the tissue in my shoulders starts to feel more like rock than tissue, and my shoulders ride up to be earrings for my ears, and I get really bad headaches. And usually that's because I have believed a lie about where my identity and security comes from.
Yeah, that's good. So when I cried for 3 days straight in the desert in Arizona, my neck popped so good. It was like a 6 month. It hadn't popped in 6 months. Wow. And it was, I mean, you're probably not supposed to pop your neck anyway, but like, I know I'm really stressed when I can't.
There was a release.
Yeah. Big time. Big time. One of the next sentences, I actually, when I was writing notes, I wrote down, and you can even peek over there and see, I wrote all caps, whoa, exclamation point. You say, though untrue, in some ways it felt like my pain was the most interesting thing about me. And also, I also worried about my ability to connect with other people. Would I remain this is so good, everybody, listen to this, just listen. Would I remain a trusted friend in the midst of joy and celebration? We talk about the struggle being real. So would my joy feel inauthentic? Did others find it easier to love me with my pile of broken toys? That is so good. First of all, here in a second, I want you to tell us the broken toy story, but man, have I experienced that. And I bet a lot of people have, where it's like so much easier for people to show up to have a front row seat to our suffering than our celebration. And we lose people when things start going well. That's hard. That's really, really hard. So maybe talk to that for a minute, because I don't even know what the question is, except say something.
There's a lot of layers, lot of directions that we could go with that quote. I think you're so right. When Paul talks about rejoicing with those who rejoice and mourning with those who mourn, that's a passage about unity. And I think if we're honest, sadly, I feel like even in the church, or maybe even especially in the church, we are really good at being interrupted by others' pain and showing up for that, and less practiced or willing to be interrupted by somebody's joy, especially if it's a dream that steps on the toes of our own.
Yes.
I think we find it easier to celebrate a joy that has nothing to do with a dream or a goal that I carry on my side of the fence. But if there's overlap there, that can be really hard.
Yeah.
And there's a story in Deuteronomy that just kicked my tail on this one. I had never read this story through this lens, but it's when the Israelites obviously have been traveling through the wilderness for years toward the promised land that God has prepared for them. And they are now so close that scripture says Moses he goes up on this hill and he can actually see it in the distance. And of course, we know he's been the Israelites' fearless leader through all those years. But he disobeyed God earlier in the journey and has been told he's not going to be the one to lead the people into the promised land, and he's not going to get to go into the promised land. And he's up on this mountain, and he actually asks God again, can I be the one? Can I please be the one? And I really try not to psychologize scripture and overlay things in there that aren't there, but it's hard to ignore that God's language is really strong. It's an emphatic no.
Yeah.
And it's also, this is the end of the conversation. We're not talking about this anymore.
Wow.
But what I'm really challenged by is what he says next. He says, I want you to commission Joshua for that job.
Wow.
So it was just such a example to me of here Moses has asked. He's expressed the desire of his heart. It was a no for him.
Right.
And God doesn't just ask him to accept that no. He asks him to then celebrate Joshua by pouring courage into him for the journey, to encourage him to pack his backpack and ready him for the job that he would love to have for himself. And I really believe that that's a picture of our call for what it looks like to not only be willing to be interrupted by someone's pain, but be interrupted by someone's joy and have it cost us something to celebrate somebody else.
You know what that makes me think of?
What?
It's going to be super holy. I hope you're ready for this.
I'm ready.
2 days ago, after I came back from the retreat, because they were talking about that there, I came back and watched Encanto. Have you seen it? And the scene where the little boy is about to go up and get his gift.
Yes.
I don't think this is too much of a spoiler alert. The whole movie is about this one member of a magical family who goes up to knock on the door and doesn't get her gift. And she's now grown up, and the little boy's going to get his, and he's too scared. He can't make the climb without her. She has to come out of the shadows in the middle of a very hard, waiting, broken, grief-filled moment and hold his hand while he gets what he's been waiting on.
That's a perfect picture.
That's hard.
Yeah.
That's so hard.
So the very place where she was experiencing loss and pain and longing, she then had to pour courage into him to get the thing that she would have loved to have for herself.
So, speak to that for a second in terms of when celebration is a discipline, celebrating other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any tips, any practical tips for those of us who are listening and we're like, nope, don't like that. I would have liked to stay in the shadows. Thank you very much. What is like a practical way? You gave a ritual or rhythm that you're using for your own celebration. Is there a place to start when celebrating other people feels hard?
Yeah, and I want to say, too, I think having a safe place to concurrently process your grief and disappointment, and it's not as if those are feelings that you need to stuff down either, but I think another unfortunate thing about the brain is that feelings tend to follow actions, and we really want to feel like doing something before we do it. It's one of the hardest things about therapy, I think. I think we want to be inspired or have our emotions in the right place before we follow through and actually do the thing. And I think this is one of the clearest examples of how the feelings follow the action. And so I really try and work with my hands in those moments. So in the book, I describe like putting together a bouquet of flowers for a friend of mine that told me she was pregnant, and our lives overlapped a lot. And for years, I mean, she's a childhood friend, and we've had a lot of overlap and a really sweet friendship, but there's been a lot of wins in her life where in places where I have yet to receive those same gifts. And but just the act of putting together the bouquet and loving through action with my hands softened my heart and I still grieved my own situation, but I also know that joy comes from doing both celebration and sorrow together instead of letting our differences and our circumstances become isolating forces. And so, and to credit this friend, she has sat with me in my longing and celebration in different parts of my life too. And so we've just sort of committed to doing both together. Yeah. And it's gleaned so much more joy for both of us than had we sort of let each other live separately.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of a story Shauna Nicholas tells in Savor, and I think maybe a couple of the other books, where she just is talking about when they were like having miscarriages and struggling and waiting, she like did a blog post that was like, if one more friend tells me that they're pregnant, I'm going to break something.
I know this story.
And then she's having lunch with a friend the next day and is like, oh man, she's pregnant. And I bet she's read that post. And the friend shows up with safety goggles and says, let's break things together. Mm-hmm. That's just so powerful. I feel like, tell the broken toys story. Yeah.
So I was flying down to Texas for a therapy retreat, but also a training. It was a group of therapists who practiced this model that I use in my practice called restoration therapy. And we also were teammates in an organization called the Hideaway Experience, which is a marriage intensive organization. And therapy retreats and trainings are a little different in that you don't really passively learn anything. It's very hands-on and very vulnerable. You're not just taking quizzes of your personality type. Like it's very, it costs you something. It's very vulnerable. And so we were doing this exercise, practicing the use of metaphor, which can really be a helpful therapeutic tool in opening up, helping us understand what we feel about something, or deepening a relational or an emotional experience. And I was kind of on the outer circle, but this exercise, we had all kind of told our stories throughout the weekend, and this exercise was reflecting on different parts of those stories and assigning a metaphor to each other's stories, and to try and open up more possibilities and deepen that experience. And so we had been doing this exercise for probably a couple of hours, and this gentleman I hardly met in front of me turned around, and I had shared my story of miscarriages, and my husband and I had 5 of them at that point, and within 4 years, it was just very chronic. And he turned around and he said, I have this picture of it's Christmas morning, and there's this beautifully wrapped gift under the tree. And you go to open it, you're so excited. And there's this toy that you've always wanted, but it's broken. Yeah. And then you sort of grieve that. You love the toy, but it's not what you expected. You can't really carry the toy forward in the way that you hoped you would be able to. Yeah. But then there's another gift under the tree, and it too is beautifully wrapped. Similar but different. And you open that, and it's another broken toy. And that was such a beautiful metaphor for what I was feeling at the time, because while I couldn't, those gifts were categorically not what I hoped for. Of course, I hoped that I could meet those babies and get to know who they are and have the privilege of raising them. there was something really precious to me about that pain.
Yeah.
And in the way that I had met God in those places, the way I had connected with the people I loved in those places.
Yeah.
And there was a part of me that wondered, as I stepped into the light of my joy, would God be there? And where would he be?
Yeah.
Similar to what you asked with, the struggle is real, but what about the celebration? I was worried that the deep relationship that I had with God would cease to be as close or look the same.
Right.
In the light of my joy.
Yeah, you talk about like this visual of like everybody celebrating in the middle of the room and like Jesus is off in the corner.
Yes.
As opposed to like in the middle. I thought that
center.
Yeah. That was so powerful. I want to talk about this idea of, can celebration whittle character within us? We're used to the messes, the storms, the struggles, you say, but can it also be worked out in our dreams, our celebrations, and our delighted joy? And for those of us who hear a word like discipline and we immediately are, nope, don't like that.
Yes.
Discipline is not our natural gifting. I just want you to talk a little bit about what are some of the fruits, the character fruits you have seen specifically come out of celebration. I know that like tenacity or patience or gentleness have come out of hard times. And I, just like you have identified, I don't really pause to count the fruit that has come out of when the hero finally gets everything she ever wanted. Cue the credits, roll the credits, cue the score. So what should we be looking for? What kind of, if celebration is the vine, what fruit grows from it?
I think relationally, really deep connection with God and the people that we love. I think Thanksgiving is the avenue we've been given to celebrate the gift with the giver. So thankfulness and gratitude. I also think, in a strange way, I think suffering can reorder what we love, but I think celebration can too, as we delight in the ways that God is moving. We're more apt to see that happening. And in some ways we find what we look for. And so when you're looking for the ways and have an expectant heart for the ways that God is showing up in your life, you'll not only see more, but you'll move forward with an expectant heart and more hopefulness and more imagination and courage to dream about what God can do. And I think for me, worry can't survive our wonder. So if we're in wonder of God, and celebration has really cultivated that for me, wow, like my imagination can't even touch the wonder of him. Then all of the sudden, I'm not focused on my worry about what's not going to happen or what won't match my vision, but I'm just full of wonder of what God's provision could look like. And then the hope and the expectancy and the dreaming and the joy and the gratitude for, yes, what's happened, but also who he is and what he can do. Has been such a beautiful paradigm shift for me.
I have this entire entry in Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots called Begin Again. And it says, I don't think there is anything more withering to slow growth than beginning again, than having to start over. So to the person listening, maybe this thought went through their head of like, okay, imagine I like do lean into celebration and expectancy and hope, and I start moving forward and I let my guard down and I'm doing all the things, and then I get sucker punched by life. How do I not let that be proof that, see, I should have just run back to those trustworthy protectors?
So reminding yourself that those protectors are not going to protect you, but also, I will just share, I confronted this a couple weeks ago when our community was sideswiped by an unimaginable tragedy. A young man's life was taken too early and in a very sudden and awful way. And I found myself you live on the Connecticut shore as well. It was an awful day. It was like right above freezing and rainy and gray. But all day long, I found myself drawn to go pick up sea glass. And it was so confusing because it was the last thing that one would have wanted to do on a day like that. Yeah. But picking up sea glass has become my ritual or practice in spending time alone with God.
Yeah.
And so once I recognized that, it made total sense to me, because celebration in the midst of suffering can't always look like rejoicing, but it looks like remembrance.
Yeah.
Remembering God's faithfulness, remembering his character. And sometimes that's the only thing that is clear.
Yeah.
Because we're so confused by the turn life has taken, or we might feel like we've done everything right and the chips are not falling where we hoped they would fall.
Yeah.
I get that. And this book is just as much meant for the person who's sitting there as it is for the one who rejoicing is coming easily in this season, because celebration is more of a rhythm of remembering God's faithfulness than a reaction to rejoicing.
That's so good. And the last big thing I want to ask you about is shame. It's shame. It's shame. Because, man, I'm like, oh, geez.
Biggie, we're ending on a large note here.
Just a little light
with a bang
about shame. Yeah. Roll the credits. Cue the score. Yes. Okay. So we talked a good bit about that, like Velcro and Teflon and how we're wired for that. And you say, shame prevents us from celebrating grace. We are stalwart in our belief that celebration must only come in the form of a reward. If you accomplish the goal, or if you participated in the effort, then and only then do you get to celebrate. Shame says there is no celebration out of what we earn, that we are unworthy without a pleasing performance. Shame whispers that our value is ours to prove and that our sin and shortcomings are ours to fix. Shame also forgets that the good things we receive in this life are gifts from God. And so this reminded me a lot of a story I tell in Dirt. And I've been talking about it a little bit on social media recently of, you know, I'm 4 years old. My dad wants me to recite 'Twas the Night Before Christmas in front of the packed church for the Christmas pageant. I'm 4. If I didn't mention that, let's say that again, 4. And it's 56 lines long, and he wants me to say it from memory, not reading it, say it from memory. And so I stand up, start to finish, nail it, totally knock it out of the park. And that, I'm telling you right now, that formed a wrinkle in my brain of, that is not the standard to strive for of excellence that maybe you occasionally hit. That was baseline.
Yeah.
Because the following year, he wanted me to do 'Twas the Night Before Jesus Came, didn't study as hard, didn't memorize as hard, and messed up a few times and had to be reminded, you know, line, whatever. And so at the end of the pageant, they would have all the parents bring one present for the kids to open that night, and all the kids were opening theirs. And I just sat off on the stage, like swinging my little feet, looking down at my Mary Jane shoes, patent leather shoes, until there was one box left under the Christmas tree, which gives me chills given what we talked about earlier. And my dad, this giant, hulking Paul Bunyan man in a suit, because he would only wear a suit, you know, for the Christmas pageant, came up and he said, "Kid, why aren't you opening your present, you know?" And I said, "Because I messed up, so I didn't earn it." And he, you know, I could tell he was, because he was very hard on me. Don't fidget and don't mess it up. I could tell he was disappointed that I had not delivered on that goal. And yet he went over and got the box and handed it to me. And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what, this gift was not for what you did. It's because your dad loves you." And I think that's such a beautiful picture of God, right? And such a beautiful picture of what you're talking about here with shame. Shame is going to say, if you didn't do it, if you didn't earn it, if you didn't make it happen. I really struggle with grace because of this. I really struggle with any kind of concept that says, come to the end of yourself with your 2 fishes and see how God multiplies it. Because I'm like, but that just makes me feel weak. That makes me feel like I didn't do my part. Why couldn't he just like catch me if I fell, but like, you know, let me go do the thing. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. I think a lot of people really have a hard time with, I love that I can't do it in my own power alone. That means God has to do it. I'm like, no, I'd really like to do it in my own power alone.
No, there's a release of control in a
Yeah.
lot of different things, but you're exactly right. That shame says you can only celebrate if you yourself have earned it. And it keeps us from celebrating grace because we're so committed to being our own savior that then our own performance becomes our only way of rescuing ourselves from that feeling of that we failed or that we didn't meet expectations or, our own perfectionism and performance becomes the hope that saves us. And that keeps us from celebrating God's grace. And we know that one surefire way to experience joy is to celebrate God. And that kicks my tail because I totally rely on that shame and that performance to dig my way out of that place. But you're exactly right. Performance then becomes the baseline, and we're always, even if we perform well, we're always worried about slipping off the pedestal.
Yes.
So your only choices are perfectionism or shame. Down.
Yeah, that's it. That was it. It was like maybe one of the worst things that could ever happen to me in terms of how my life.
Yes, I remember reading that story when I read your book, and it was such a powerful picture of how so many of us feel.
Yeah. You say, in our shame, we are inconsolable, giving those around us an experience of being simultaneously pushed and pulled. We crave the affirmation and validation, but can't receive it. Yet we hope others will keep trying. I was like, get out of my email, Nicole Zasowski. What are you doing to me? That is so how I feel. I bet that's how so many people are feeling. Sadie Robertson, when she was on a couple weeks ago, she was talking about social media, and she said the irony of the like button is that we never feel loved or that we never feel seen enough to be loved. And even if somebody does, we don't believe them.
Yes.
And I think that's just like, those are, flip sides of the coin, or maybe the same side of the coin, I'm not sure, where we just all resonate with that so much. Like, please, I can't really believe you, but please don't stop trying.
Yes. I'm waiting for my husband to pop out around the corner. He would be happy to share what this is like on the receiving end.
Well, my husband is over there. So.
He's nodding behind the camera. That shame, I call Eeyore the poster child for shame. And it's basically this black hole of affirmation. Like, I want you to try and fill me because I've convinced myself that the right compliment or enough of them is going to be the difference maker in making me feel good about myself. It's sort of offloading the responsibility of speaking kindly to yourself on somebody else. But the unfortunate thing is, if whatever kindness they're speaking to you doesn't match the voice that's playing inside, it will get rejected. Yeah. Or it will feel good for a second and the effects won't last.
And then, like you said earlier, then you'll wonder why they said, you're a really good writer versus really great writer.
Yes.
Or, I really liked that versus I really loved that. Or
you'll
what have you.
Find something that it could be improved upon. Yeah.
So much of what we were just talking about there is the journey of slow growth equals strong roots, which is the season we're in here with the podcast. All season long, we are bringing it back to that message of you cannot achieve your way into worth. And when you reach a point of at last exhausted, it's the best thing that can happen to you because it's actually the end of yourself, the start of the end of yourself, and this place of surrender. So with everything that we've said to the woman who's listening, and she's like, yep, okay, got it. So nothing anybody ever says to me, nothing I ever achieve, like no amount of more is ever gonna, my brain is actually hardwired for that not to be enough. I'm beginning to reach the end of myself. I'm beginning to reach at last exhausted. What do you say to that woman for here's your next step forward, your next celebration forward, your next rhythm forward, the phrase to remind yourself, like something you cling to when those wolves of achievement are howling?
Well, the first thing that's coming to mind just as an absolute sit in the mud pit with you moment is, when I started thinking about practicing celebration and what that would look like, there was this little performance-oriented question in me that thought, do I need to demonstrate a certain level of hope or demonstrate an expectant heart before God is willing to intervene, which shows you how much I was overlaying my own pain onto God and his character. And I just want to encourage you, God's faithfulness to you does not depend on your faith. His goodness in your life is not a function of your goodness. So celebration is not about proof. There's just so much joy available to us when we take God at his word and when we celebrate him.
Yeah.
And I think, that not expecting more joy from gifts than they were meant to give.
Yeah.
Celebrate the good things in your life. Celebrate the people in your life. That cultivates joy, but none of them are it.
That's so good. That is so good. Let them know where they can find you, follow you, connect with you, and get this book.
Yes. You can get the book anywhere you like to buy books. Of course, it's on Amazon, but big fan of local bookstores too. My website is NicoleZasowski.com, NicoleZasowski.com. There's a free guide on there for working through your own what-if questions and navigating those, and a bunch of other free resources as well. And I'm just at Nicole Zasowski on Instagram, which is where I hang out the most.
Yeah. All right, friends, in closing, I had the huge honor of getting to endorse this beautiful book, and I would like to read that endorsement to you now. This book is a psalm, a patchwork of poetry and praise stitched together with expert precision as Nicole lays out a compelling case for celebration unlike any I have ever seen before. But even more than that, these words are a balm, a salve to some very old, still open wounds that most of us have never gotten around to healing. With all the gentleness of a trusted friend and sister, Nicole takes us by the hand, walks us right up to the mirror, and sits with us while we stare face to face with this one truth we have been avoiding for far too long. Our whole lives are passing us by in a blur while we wait on what could go wrong. We have grown accustomed to the pain, familiar with the sound of our own fear, but here in the pause of these pages, a new question emerges. Will we have the courage to lean into hope again? For every one of us who has dared not let our guard down, believing that if we don't get our hopes up, then disappointment can't hurt us again, this book is both an anthem and a way forward, a light in the darkness pointing us back to the promise of possibility, this thrill of hope on the horizon. The book is What If It's Wonderful, an invitation to release your fears, choose joy, and find the courage to celebrate. And it's out now everywhere books are sold. Get this book and Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots while you're at it. Get them in your hands and go through them together. And until next time, friends, this is the Mary Marantz Show.